Once, I was talking to someone, and sincerely, I don't remember exactly who it was. And he explained to me something from a medical point of view, a scientific point of view. And he said that we have our system, our body. There's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So there's a part of our system that is autonomous, that just works involuntarily. We don't need to think about it. And then there's another part of the actions and the functions of our body are actually done with awareness, with intention. So it's, if I remember well, it's one part of our body, if it's not, it's the only part of our body that has both of these functions is our breath. But if we were to count the quantity of activities that we do, automatically, let's say, involuntarily, they're much more than what we do having to think about it. I don't think that any of us needs to think, okay, now, okay, my liver is going to do this, and my kidneys or need to do that, and my heart and my lungs. And there's so much happens within our bodies in every instant that they need to coordinate among each other. It's enormous what goes on in our bodies. And they work quite well. They're able to say they is us. These involuntary functions, they work well, but there's so many things that are happening. And in this exact moment, the simple fact that I'm talking and you're listening, there's a quantity of things that are happening that's making this possible. It's incredible, right? And the part of our being, of our body, together with our mind, which is all one, that happens in an involuntary way, that's enormous. That's enormous. And there's a very, very small part that depends on our aware thoughts, our thoughts done with awareness. And we're able, with that very small part of that small part of freedom that we have, we're able to, to trick all the rest. I don't know if I'm explaining myself. We have a very, very small amount of freedom, of free will, but with a tremendous amount of power. We have what we eat, how we use our senses. That depends on a choice that we do with awareness. It's not involuntary. The way we communicate with others, when we go to sleep, when we wake up, what we do during the day. These are all choices that are quite voluntary, done with awareness. And with these choices, we can sustain the whole rest of our system, our body, or trick it or treat it badly, let's say. It's happened a couple times, or I've spoken to people talking about meditation. I've asked them if they like meditation. They say, yes, I love meditation. I remember I asked which one, and someone said, oh, I do self-healing practice. Lama Michel Rinpoche taught me, and I asked about his experiences. When I do the practice of self-healing in the morning, when I meditate in the morning, I feel good all day long. And I said, how wonderful. So it really works well for you. It has a positive effect. So you do it every day. Oh, no, I haven't done it for 3 months. And this brought me to an inner searching, to ask myself, to ask why is it so often difficult to do what is good for us and abandon what is detrimental, even when it's obvious, it's apparent, it's so clear that this is good for us and that is bad for us. In these 2 previous days here at this center, we had a congress together with the University of Psychology from Milan University, together with psychologists and doctors in training. One of the most shocking things that came out is that we live in a cancer epidemic. The numbers, if I remember them well, 1 in every 3 women in Italy will in his lifetime have cancer, and 1 in 4 men, or the opposite. Instead, in Holland, it's 50% of the population in their lifetime will have a tumor, malignant tumor. But the most shocking thing is that the primary causes of cancer, more than 35% of the tumors, even for prevention, are based on lifestyle and personal choices, of which most of them we already know. And I ask myself, how is it possible that we know that certain things are really bad for us, and regardless, we keep doing them? How is it possible that we know that certain things are good for us, and just the same, we don't do them? Someone says, because we're ignorant. I agree. But let's try to understand better. How can we change this a little bit? A little bit like something else that I heard some time ago. It just shocked me. It's obvious that what I eat influences my body and my health. That's logical, isn't it? Just think about a car. If you put the wrong gas in the car, the wrong fuel in the car, you're going to have to change your car not too long after. In Europe, the statistics that, I mean, we can trust statistics up to a certain point, but let's give a range from one side to the other. They say that about 3% of the European population eats in a healthy way. Let's say 6%. But why do they not eat in a healthy way? Because they're missing the knowledge about it. I don't believe that 94% of the population doesn't know what is healthy, a healthy diet is. Is it because we don't have the economic resources for it? I don't think that 97% or 94% doesn't have the material resources to eat correctly in a healthy way. So why? Because we are lacking we're lacking this inner strength to do one of the greatest challenges, to face one of the greatest challenges in life, which is this greatest challenge in life has to do with 2 things. We have 4 types of situations that we live, 4 types of objects that we face, that we encounter. There are situations, objects, call them what you want, the phenomena we interact with, where those interactions are pleasurable and they're good for us. And we don't need to worry about that because naturally we're attracted to these and they're good for us. And then we have situations or objects, they're unpleasant and bad for us. And there too, we don't need to worry about those, because the things that are unpleasant and are bad for us, we naturally want to avoid them because they're unpleasant. And the challenge of life have to do with the other two. There are situations, things, interactions where that interaction, that first impact is pleasurable, but mid and long term, they are bad for us. They're harmful. And that first challenge is to avoid and abandon that which is pleasurable, but that is bad for us. The second challenge, that goes together in order of importance, has to do with the things that on the first impact are unpleasant, tiresome, we don't like them, etc., but that are good for us, are beneficial. And we need to cultivate those. So one of the main challenges we have in our lives is our ability to look beyond, just a little bit beyond the tip of our nose, going a little bit further, and give priority to our mid and long-term results, and not look always at the immediate. Why is it so hard to think about what has a benefit in the mid and long term? Why is it so hard to avoid that which is pleasurable and what is negative, and cultivate or what is first impact unpleasant but then beneficial? Let's talk about meditation. For those who are not used to meditation, it's tiresome, and tiresome for that means most of us. It's a tiresome experience. So it can be. It requires effort. Bringing the mind, taking the mind to do the opposite of what it's used to is really tiresome, and meditating regularly every day for half an hour, one needs to put effort in that. And when we need to work for it, it's unpleasant. We need to work. It's something tiresome, but it's beneficial. Stopping to eat. To stop eating things that are bad for us, for example. For me, it's so clear for me. I mean, it's so obvious, this example. Is there anyone who has any level of doubt about refined sugar consumption? Do you have any doubt as to whether it's good for you or not good for you? I don't know. I ask myself this. If we think about the average, of a country that is the average in a developed country like the one we live in, the average person eats an amazing quantity of sugar every year. And I'm not talking about fruit or other sugars. And obviously, our body is not designed to metabolize this level of sugar. I mean, kilos and kilos of sugar every year. And there are so many studies that prove this. So now, let's say, is it easy or difficult to stop eating sugar? It's difficult. Like, it's difficult to meditate with constancy. It's difficult to change our habits of any kind, the way we speak, the way we eat, the way we interact, up to the way we actually think. There exists instead. There's a basic concept that I think that is strongly connected to this difficulty that we have. One aspect that determines our lifestyle is, we use the term drupta in Tibetan. We can translate as world view or paradigm. And within our paradigm, within our worldview, there's the actual inner structure of where from that inner structure we come into contact and we perceive reality, and wanting or not, we interact with the world through that paradigm, through our own worldview, which is not on a cognitive or theoretical level. It's much deeper. Our worldview doesn't come from today. It's something that we somehow, how can I say, we have acquired. Most of our worldview comes from our the society and the culture that we come from. We acquire a great part of that, and then we elaborate it on a more personal level. Do you agree? Are you following? Let me just give you a very simple example. In Buddhist philosophy, for example, we say there are two fundamental aspects of the mind, what we call kundak and tlenkye. I translated, it's not perfect, but the idea comes, tlenkye, these are spontaneous mental states. These mental states that don't depend on a cultural or social context. And kundak, instead, those are mental states that are constructed, that depend on a socio-cultural context. An example that I gave many times, and I think it's very clear, is if I come to you and I ask you what, I put two shirts in front of you, one pink and one blue, and I ask you, which one is for little girls and which one is for little boys? So the pink one or the blue one, which one should we use for the little girls? The pink one, right? So what's the color? What's the color for girls? So the color for girls is pink and the color for boys is blue. Why? Because it's like that. We don't think about it too much. We dress little boys in blue and we dress little girls in pink. If you send your little boy to school with a pink shirt, he might be bullied. But spontaneously, we see that pink is for girls and for blue is for boys. Do we agree on this? That we have this so-called, we can say spontaneous view, but where does it come from? Let me see if I remember the numbers and the dates. It doesn't matter exactly, but I think in 1917, it was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It happens that up to that point, colored, dyed textiles were extremely expensive. So most of the population, and even more so for children, what did children wear? Gray, cream, I mean the actual color of the cloth itself. And who wore dyed clothing? Nobles and people who had a lot of money. It was a great sign of wealth. And at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, one of the first things that happens is that dyed clothing become accessible to a large part of the population. And those who first sold colored clothing for children, they needed to teach the population the right colors. And so in the United States, they were looking at the the they were looking at actually the cultural tendencies in France, and pink actually was the color of male nobility, and the blue, this light blue, was a softer color and was more appropriate for girls. And then I think actually this is so 1918 they do the first marketing campaign to sell clothing for children, and the girls' clothing was light blue and the boys' clothing was pink. And for the first couple years, the boys were dressed in pink and the girls were dressed in blue. In 1920, with industrialization, there came a problem. Or we create desires and needs that are unreal, let's say, or our factories need to close because this ability to produce and to feed the machine, let's say, we need to keep selling. Because before this, how often would you buy clothing? As you'd wear clothing until they were completely ruined. I mean, the clothing was about protecting one's body, not about constructing an image. It happens that around 1920, these very sly marketing, advertising companies, they inverted it and they did a new advertising campaign in around 1920 where they said, "Oh, we're wrong. Girls in pink and boys in blue." Obviously, they couldn't change every 2 years. And here we're in 2023, and here we are still, girls dressed in pink and boys dressed in blue. And what I mean to say is that this example, this shows it shows a constructed mentality, a constructed view, and we have an infinite number of constructed views, aspects of our daily lives. When we grow up and we're raised within a culture, and we acquire an infinite number of constructed views within that culture, right? Okay, and with this, I don't mean to say that they're all wrong and it's bad because they're constructed. I'm not saying that. I'm saying simply that there are so many aspects of the way we live our world that we take for granted that they're just like that. They're assumptions that are nothing other than constructed aspects that come from a historic, cultural context. Within this, there's one of the most important points that has to do with our worldview. For me, it's the most important point. One of the founding pillars of our world view, our paradigm, is where we project our happiness and where we project our suffering. And if we see historically, it's changed over time. We've come from periods of where there was an identity that was much more collective. To give you an example, within astrology, there was a long period where in the West and also in the East, where only the king had his chart done, and if it was good for him, it was good for everyone. If it was bad for him, it was bad for everyone. And so when it was a year that was astrologically difficult for the king, everyone pulled together and worked together and paid attention to that. And this collective identity went from the king and then to the family, and now we're at the extreme of individualism. And I'm not here to say what's better and what's worse. What I mean to say is that today we have a worldview where our happiness is totally connected with the I and the mind. But it wasn't always like this from a sociocultural point of view. Where do we project our happiness? Where do we project our suffering? I don't know exactly from when, but from a certain point, I don't know, maybe I'm 30 years, 40 years or so. Let's say in the last couple decades or so, there's constantly rising. We're projecting our happiness more and more in pleasures. What happens is, as long as we need to survive, one projects one's happiness in surviving. My priority is survival as an individual and as a species. And if we see those who are in situations where they need to live to survive, actually they have much fewer mental problems. In the morning, he who in the morning needs to wake up and walk a half an hour to go fetch water, and then to eat needs to cultivate the soil, and to stay warm needs to cut the wood, to have wood in the wintertime. So if 80% of the energy that one has is used up for physical survival, how much energy is left for mental games and mental suffering? Let's say it another way. How much energy is left for the mind, for the brain to reflect and think about other things? Very little. When survival is something assured, where we don't have to put so much energy directly into our survival. I mean, it's a crazy system that we've been able to create. Our survival is assured, is a given. How much energy do we have we freed up? So much. My question is, how are we using this energy? We can use it to study, to learn, to develop culture and art, or watch TV 24/7. We can do thousands and thousands of different things. There's an infinite number of things that we can do. But the trap I see, and let's connect it to our starting point here, is that once we have our assured survival, the next level, normally, naturally, we project at that point, we project our happiness not in surviving, but in avoiding any form of suffering or unpleasantness, and in trying to get any form of desire. And more we're going towards a lifestyle that is going in that direction, where to be happy I need to avoid what I don't like, and I need to obtain what I want, what I like. For me, one of the clearest examples is the way that we eat. Normally, do we eat what we need, or do we eat what we like? And what happens when we find ourselves in front of a dish that we don't like? and somehow, I mean, that's what's there to eat. Can we live it as if it's a kind of violence against ourselves? Oh, there's nothing here that I like. There's lots of things that are good for me, but nothing that I like. Poor me. For me, one of the clearest examples is when you go to a restaurant. I repeat this. I've said it many times, but I repeat it because I'm just I'm putting out these seeds and maybe they've sprouted at some point. Once I went to, it can happen, where you go to a restaurant and sorry, I'm dreaming of a restaurant where you don't have a menu, let's say, but a kind of questionnaire based on, let's say, the humor systems that they use in Ayurvedic medicine, Tibetan medicine, Chinese medicine, so you can understand what your physical and mental needs are. Do you need energy? Do you need to rest? How's your morale? How do you feel today? So based on this questionnaire, then one does a very, very simplified diagnosis, and then based on that, the right dishes come out for you. And you choose, okay, you have 3 possibilities based on what you need, because food is medicine or poison. So let's change this view where I don't eat because I like it, and I don't eat necessarily only what I like. I eat something if it's good for me. So these are these 4 points we talked about before in relation to food. We don't need to worry about eating things that we like that are good for us. We don't need to worry about stopping to eat things that we don't like that is bad for us, because naturally we'll try to avoid it. The real challenge is eating that which is that we don't like but that is good for us, and stop eating the things that we like but that are bad for us. The good news here is that if I really start to stop eating what is good for me, if I stop eating what is bad for me but that I like, then it really, my relationship with that thing actually changes. It will stop thinking that that's something that we like. But why is it so hard? We go to a doctor and the doctor says you need to stop eating this thing, and it might be that thing that you like that you like the most. And that's happened to me, actually. It told me that I should stop eating dairy products and mozzarella. Mozzarella was one of my favorite things. Okay. And I was thinking, how can I not eat mozzarella? But it's possible. Why do we eat what is bad for us? Because we're sick. When the system is unbalanced, our system is attracted to that which increases this unbalance. When our system is balanced, it's attracted to that which maintains this balance. Think about something that is resting on a scale. When it's completely balanced, the force of gravity goes towards that balance. Once it's out of balance, then the force of gravity pulls down and increases that imbalance. So the more balanced our body is, the more attracted we will be to things that maintain that balance. The hard part is when we're like this, we need to put energy in the opposite way, and that's tiresome. Putting energy in the opposite direction when we're talking about food, that means eating that which is good for us, but that we don't like, and stopping to eat that which is bad for us, but that even if we like it. When I see the path of Dharma and facing our mental defilements and cultivating the six perfections, etc., one of the most important things is um, our our inner strength called enthusiastic effort, constancy, our willpower. When I was told that I couldn't eat this and I should be eating this, as many years ago, at the beginning, I had digestive problems, and a doctor said, "You need to stop eating for at least 6 months all dairy products and all any type of wheat and nothing raw, be it fruit or vegetables." Okay. And there was a little bit, that was the basis, but there was a couple other things too. And I thought, how can I eat? How can I live without mozzarella? How can I eat without pasta? This, and every every time I went to Brazil, I would just live off of fresh fruit juice, which I, of course, had to avoid too. And at the beginning, I lived it like a kind of sacrifice. And there's a part that would say, why? Why me? Everyone's eating mozzarella. Why can't I eat mozzarella? Why me? Almost like there is something unfair, unjust about it. I felt in that moment, I felt like a victim in that moment. I'm the victim of something, of someone, and now I can't do this and I can't have that. And I remember very well that moment where I just changed it all. I was in front of food and someone offered me something something I really liked, but I shouldn't eat. And I asked myself this question: why do I eat? Do I eat because I like something or because my body needs it? Personally, if I could never eat, I would be very happy. I mean, how much energy do we put into food? Buying food, cooking food, washing dishes, digesting. Just think, and on the water we use. Yeah, you think that, I mean, one of the most precious resources we have is water. And when you think about the water in our body, the most the largest amount of water in our body is used up for pushing out our shit. Sorry for the term. I mean, think about living if we didn't have to eat. So what if I don't eat because I want, but I eat because I need? And given that I eat because I need and not because I want, should I eat what I like or what I actually what I need? I need to eat what I need. And so from that moment, I saw that fact of not eating what I liked, but what was bad for me, there's no sacrifice. I really saw it as an act of love towards myself. And that I just it made a click within, and it became very easy. The difficulty is when you're very hungry and you really can't find anything that is good for you. But the point is, as long as we have within our worldview that it's our right to do what we like, and that we are a kind of victim when we have to do what we don't like, or one of the greatest energies that we have is our actual desire, if we feel that we can't satisfy our pleasures, we really just become a slave. And I'm not against any pleasures. I think it's wonderful to live life in a state of bliss and joy. It's marvelous. It's important that that bliss doesn't have a very high price to pay. Is that clear? It's not that one should feel guilty if you do something pleasurable. The opposite. But we need to understand that happiness is not in the pleasure. Happiness lies within satisfaction. And if we use a more modern term that can help us understand this a little bit better, more and more we live in a society, a reality where there's there's a level of addiction that's higher and higher, an addiction of dopamine. This hormone that when you feel pleasure, this hormone increases, it comes out, it's produced. So what happens? The nature of dopamine is that once a pleasure ends, this as it goes up, then it comes down and has a very clear function. After a moment of pleasure and that increase of dopamine that we felt, there's that moment of when it finally ends. Are we able to stay a long time in that satisfied in a state of bliss, or once it ends, do we want more? From your own experience, what would you say? That we want it again. Why is our system made like this? Does it seem intelligent, or wouldn't it be better that after we experience a pleasure that we're able to stay for a long time satisfied? No, because if it were like this, we wouldn't be alive. We wouldn't have been able to survive. I mean, it's actually because I do something that's pleasurable and I have that kind of craving to get that pleasure again, that I'm actually I can find the strength and the effort to find that pleasure again. So sugar, for example, before the Industrial Revolution, how hard was it to find sugar? 200 years ago, 150 years ago. It was less available. It was a lot less available. And it's not for nothing that when we celebrate things, we use sweet things. But sugar is important to us. It's a substance that is important for our bodies in small quantities. So it was difficult to find, but when you do find it, you feel a lot of pleasure, and then once you've felt that pleasure, you want to have that experience again. And because you've had that strong pleasure, you're open to putting in a lot of effort. So pleasure has a strong relationship to our inner reward system. You understand what I mean? I hope. Or rather, we don't put effort into anything that we don't find beneficial. And there are 3 stimuli in our lives that push us to do things. We want to avoid a suffering, we want to get a pleasure, or we do something for moral questions. These are the 3 things, the only 3 things that push us to do what we do. Now, if I get pleasure drinking water, and I feel also pleasure by reading a book, and I feel pleasure listening to the sound of the singing bowl. At a certain point, I want this to feel pleasure, but to drink water, I need to walk a half an hour. To read the book, I need to put to activate my concentration, and I'm feeling tired. And instead, just to hear the sound of the singing bowl, I can just relax. And that's what we do, because we don't really care about where the pleasure comes from. We just want to feel pleasure. So if I have a lifestyle where I can have dopamine without working hard for it, then why should I work hard for anything when I always have this dopamine in the palm of my hand, literally? So the fact that we always have pleasure at our disposal, it influences strongly our inner reward system. So we're always less and less available and open to working hard for something, even if it's pleasurable, because we already have this dopamine at our disposal. So why should we work hard? I mean, why should I change my lifestyle? Why should I do this that's good for me and avoid that's bad for me, when I can have immediate pleasure whenever I want? The real problem is that it's not conceptual. It comes on a deeper, spontaneous level. Actually, comes from our evolutionary processes of millions of years, actually. But luckily, we can direct our choices. We can direct our lifestyle through our worldview with awareness. That small amount of free will that I talked about before has an enormous potential. We're not able to say, okay, if I feel immediate pleasure, we're not able to say, okay, I don't generate any attachment to it. No, if I feel pleasure, I want to repeat it. And when I don't have that pleasure, I look for it. And that's what happened with drugs. That's what happens with sugar. Sugar is a drug. And it's what happens with social media. They're drugs that are part of our lives. Okay? And they're there available. And we don't have this freedom to say, oh, I have this amazing strength of willpower, where I can say, I'm not going to react to a surge of dopamine that comes when I experience pleasure. No, this is part of our system. But that little part of free will, we need to protect it. Something interesting is that from a chemical point of view, what is the part that chemically speaking, what would we call happiness? And this also it corresponds to what Buddhist philosophy thinks about happiness. We would say that serotonin, because serotonin is more linked to satisfaction. And so dopamine is much more connected to taking, and instead serotonin is much more connected to sharing and in giving, that brings a state of joy. And there's another fundamental point here, that it's a neurotransmitter, which is oxytocin, that has to do with really with connecting with others, with looking into someone's eyes, being in contact with others, that brings this state of well-being. So if we're able to invert a little bit and see that pleasure is fine, okay, but it's nothing other than a stimulation for our reward system, our inner reward system. But our objective, um, um, our 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 system is much more stable and based on serotonin and oxytocin, where we can give and we can share and we can connect, instead of that dopamine, where we're taking and we're in this individualistic mind frame. So if we gradually were able to change our worldview and see that happiness is not in pleasure, but the happiness is found in satisfaction, in connection, is harmony, in living our life with meaning, in giving love, in receiving love. And then when we give love, we're naturally already receiving it. That's where we really can find a state of well-being and happiness. But if we don't change our worldview from a vision of a drug addict, what are we addicted to? Pleasure, dopamine. And so then we need to go through this period of abstinence to see differently, to then get to a view where we realize that happiness can be found in giving and sharing, in making our life meaningful, in trusting ourselves and being trustworthy for others. And in the middle, I mean, there are pleasures, and I repeat that pleasures are important. They have a function. Again, I mean, imagine in the Vajrayana Buddhism, pleasure is extremely important. It's an extremely tool. It's a tool. It's not an end in and of itself. Someone could say, oh, in Vajrayana Buddhism, bliss is so central. Bliss is pleasure. Yes, it's important, but there's a condition, there's a prerequisite. Lama Tsongkhapa, in the commentary of Guhya Samadra, called it's the text where he explains clearly the 5 points of the completion stage of Guhya Samadra. In this text, Lama Tsongkhapa says, if the pleasure, the so-called bliss, bliss is the strongest tool for one's spiritual practice, but the prerequisite is the actual non-attachment to pleasure itself. You can spend hours explaining the why and see why pleasure is important. It's important as a means, as a tool, and not an end in and of itself. We could spend hours talking about it. Even for practicing Tantra, it's fundamental to have a worldview where pleasure is a means and not an end. Because if we keep on with this worldview where pleasure is the objective, the most important objective, we'll end up ruining our physical health, our mental health, and our relations. Are you following? Now we need to look at ourselves and ask ourselves the question and repeat the question daily. What do I want? Do I simply want to avoid suffering and feelings of displeasure, momentary displeasure, and obtain pleasures? Or do I want to eliminate the causes of suffering? Do I want to cultivate the causes of peace and happiness? Atisha, in one of his teachings, said very clearly, the problem is not suffering. Suffering is nothing other than a manifestation of the problem. The problem is a deep state of imbalance and conflict that we live with ourselves and with others that shows up as suffering, but the suffering is the symptom, it's the siren. The alarm, the sickness is the sickness is leaving an unhealthy lifestyle. This attachment to self-gratification, this obsession with self-gratification. The problem is not suffering. The problem is continuing to cultivate a lifestyle that goes. A lifestyle that sustains the causes of suffering. Well, we should start with simple things, with how we eat. In 1985, 6, 7, 8, Lama Michel Rinpoche had just arrived in in the West and gave his first teachings, and you can read these teachings in Self-Healing 1, where he said we need to learn how to discern between our real friends and our false friends. Who are our fake friends? Those who appear to be beneficial but are actually detrimental. And the example that he used again and again and again was coffee. And at a certain point, he saw that it was useless to talk about coffee because it's so eradicated in our culture. But he went on, he used other examples. But what does coffee do when we drink it? Coffee gives us energy. Who drinks coffee agrees that coffee gives us energy, right? One's tired, one drinks coffee, and one feels energetic. Coffee doesn't give energy. Coffee inhibits a part of the brain, the one that helps us relax and rest. So actually, we're borrowing energy from ourselves, and once that effect finishes, we're even more tired. But when we think about the quantity of stimulation we get from coffee, when one then goes to rest, one is not able, and so what do we take then to help us rest and relax? Alcohol. So maybe someone during the day drinks a lot of coffee during the day to stay awake, and then drinks alcohol to relax, or any other like substance, or maybe even agar, or a movie until you fall asleep. So we activate our system to then have to bring it down again instead of living a natural system. I remember Lama Lawan, for example, once in an interview with a journalist who asked him, what are the the what sicknesses do you see most here in the West? And he said sicknesses relative to the wind energy called lung. Too much mental activity based on too many stimuli, a lifestyle full of stimuli, and also a diet that is on a cold nature diet and too much coffee. This creates so many problems. Too much mental activity. So what I mean to say to conclude is there's so many things that we know. What I invite you to do is to take just one, and say, this one I want to stop. At least diminish it and cultivate something else. Have this act of love towards ourselves, to abandon what is bad for us and to cultivate what is good for us. Start with one small thing, because when you're able with one, and then you can go on to the second and then to the third. Every small action has a tremendous power of transformation within. Okay. The question is to simply saying this, simply saying, sorry, sometimes when we make a change it's because we need to. So one thing is the addictions we have, and another thing. Sorry, I missed this. Both are difficult. What's important is that it's not enough to just say, I'm not going to do this. Actually, it's important for us to substitute it with something else. In general, this reminds me of someone who one day said, I in my life have used every drug imaginable, and I can assure you that someone who is in that situation telling me that I shouldn't take drugs is useless. The solution is to have me do something else. I mean, the day is made up of 24 hours. If my energy is taken by something else, then naturally my energy will go there. Of course, it's not that easy. I mean, there are addictions, and that's another point. The Here we're talking about where we are putting our energy. Today, it's fundamental, and it's not related to one specific addiction or another. What I wanted to talk about today has most to do with our world view. that then can be applied to many other things. In this process of change, transformation, it's important, obviously, to know how to see and recognize our needs, which is not obvious. It's not that easy. Understand what our needs are and how we can actually take care. But we need absolutely to put energy into that which will substitute what we're taking away. Because if I take away a habit that I have, to watch it, like watching hours and hours of movies, or I want to change the way I eat, it's important to have something else to substitute that activity with. And possibly it's important to substitute it with something that is appealing, that has something that attracts me. Because if I take something away that's pleasurable and I don't put anything else that's also pleasurable but is also beneficial to me, then I don't know how much I'll be able to manage that exchange. So in this process, if we're able to say this is not good for me, even though I like it, and if we're able to find something that we like but that's good for us, that would be ideal to substitute those two things. But the point here is not, as you were saying before, because it's empty of inherent existence. No, in my opinion, one of the most important, of course, reflecting on emptiness has its importance, but the point here is trying to have more clarity and repeat to oneself, to have with an objective that's mid and long term. Ask yourself, do I want to be sick? Or do I want to get sick? No. And what I'm doing now is taking me to that direction. And we need to repeat this. We need to see it again. It's not enough just to say it once. These are deep, deep habits. That's why we need to repeat it. When we take vows, for example, why do we need every day, 6 times a day, to repeat these vows? Because we forget. Because we have habits. And if I take a vow for 1 week of not eating sugar, ideally we should repeat that 3 times before every meal. To do something, to remind ourselves of why we've taken this commitment. Otherwise, we forget and we slip. And then in that void, by taking away something, we need to substitute it ideally with something else. But there's something important out here now to conclude. I don't believe that, how can I say? I don't believe that the simple solution exists. I've never seen it. If there was a simple solution, we'd all be enlightened and we'd live in a world of peace and harmony. But a fundamental point that is part of this solution is our own worldview that should be gradually transformed. And our small daily actions, we can over time make these beneficial changes. It's not immediate and it's not easy, and we're all different. We need to find our own way, our own balance. And we could talk about this for days. Another point that's very important is along the process of cultivating what is good for us and abandoning what's bad for us, what we need to do also, we need to rejoice, we need to celebrate, we need to praise ourselves and say how wonderful I was able to do this, and the practices that Buddha gave us to do. The 2 things that we need to do every day is to openly admit openly admit things that negative things that we've done, and rejoice for the positive things that we've done, and so there a strong self-esteem can come. That we need the strong self-esteem to sustain the mind that we can do this. Otherwise, we just give up. And let's remember, this process of healing is a gradual process and a long process. So there's no hurry in getting there, but there is quite a hurry to start walking, because if we have this hurry of already having arrived, then we fall into a trap from the beginning. I just repeat, let's concentrate on the basis, which is our world view, and try to um, invert this view, where instead of thinking about the source of happiness being pleasure, the source of happiness being satisfaction. It's time for our dedications. At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Tashidele, have a good day to everyone.